By the early 2050s, all was not going good for the European Commonwealth, with the war in the Middle East taking a toll on all member states. The war had taken its toll on all sectors of the global economy, with the human cost being the largest since World War II, 2,000 men a week, most of it coming from the European Commonwealth, only exacerbating the domestic front for the entirety of the Commonwealth. All the member states were now forced to deal with the large amounts of nationalists, communists and anti-war activists, all of whom were desperately seeking to end the Commonwealth's very existence.
This is Colonel David Hartsworth of the 1st Infantry Regiment of the British Armed Forces. The Arabs and the Israelis have entrenched themselves deeply within the confines of Aleppo. Our scouts counted at least 65,000 enemy troops entrenched within the city, with hundreds of anti-tank guns, at least 200 to 500 tanks, over a dozen anti-aircraft batteries per city block, trenches that stretch for kilometers, and artillery batteries located near the middle of the city. The 7th Armoured and the 1st Infantry Divisions of Her Majesty's Army have been tasked with taking the city from the enemy. RAF, the Luftwaffe, and the French Air Force have also allocated assets in assisting in the capture of the city. We've pummeled the city with artillery completely and have made some progress in taking parts of Al-Muslimiyah and the Aleppo industrial zone, but the enemy continues to resist our attempts of pushing them outside. The 1st Infantry Regiment noted heavy combat coming from inside the industrial sector of the city, with us taking major blocks in the north of the district. Only time can tell how much fight the enemy has left.
By the end of 2052, the Commonwealth's forces were engaged in heavy combat in Syria, with a combined force of Arabs and Israelis putting up an undefeated defense of Aleppo, a particular hotspot in the war. In the east, German, British, Italian and French troops made a massive breakthrough in Iranian lines and had managed to cut them off entirely from the rest of the Middle East. However, by this time, pro-communist militias within the country had fled into the Soviet Union, returning to fight with Soviet-supplied weaponry. Commonwealth governments condemned the Soviet Union for funding and arming anti-Commonwealth militias, a claim the Soviets vehemently denied. In the African front, Italian, German and French troops landed in Libya, catching the country off guard. However, Egyptian and Tunisian forces would enter the country to assist in repelling the offensive. Following the invasion of Libya, the Algerians would enter the war, committing a large amount of forces in defense of their allies. For the next 2 years, the war would largely remain stalemated, with the stalemate only ending in 2056, when the 7th Armoured Division and the 1st Infantry Division pushed out the last resistance in Aleppo. Another major victory for the European Commonwealth at this time was when German and French troops succeeded in the siege of Tehran, a tremendous victory for the Commonwealth. In the next week, the British and German troops would succeed in their siege of Isfahan, another major Iranian city. Following their victory in Aleppo, both the 7th Armoured and the 1st Infantry Division would join the 3rd Infantry Division of the British Army, and the 14th Panzergrenadier Infantry Division would steamroll Arab defences in the West Syrian city of Hama, adopting new strategies invented by British commander Major General Richard Woodbury. All 3 divisions involved in Hama were now faced with besieging the heavily entrenched city of Homs, a city that had been preparing for 2 years. The Commonwealth realized that they had to weaken enemy defences to even create a breakthrough. The Commonwealth forces utilized SAS teams to wreak havoc on the strong Syrian defenders. At the same time, in the Eastern Front, the Turkish occupational forces were struggling in holding and maintaining order within the captured Iraqi territories, as enemy insurgents would frequently ambush inexperienced Turkish security forces, desperately seeking to weaken Commonwealth's resolve, hoping to slow their advances in Iran. Further east, the 3rd Armoured Division of the French Army and the 13th Panzer Division were facing a heavy enemy counter-offensive in the city of Shiraz, where a combined force of pro-communist militias and the Iranian army were pushing out the battle-fatigued Commonwealth forces. In response, the Luftwaffe would carpet bomb entire sections of Shiraz, destroying large amounts of the city in one fatal blow. This method used by German forces would result in the Soviets, Chinese, Indians, and various Eastern-aligned African nations calling for an investigation into the ethically doubtful methods used by the Commonwealth's forces. In the African front, Italian and French troops had single-handedly managed to capture large amounts of land in Tunisia, Algeria, and Libya during their harsh offensive, and were now looking into yet another offensive to cut off the Egyptians from the rest of the Middle East, hoping to capture the Suez Canal to assist the war effort. However, the air forces of both nations had largely depleted during their offensives to capture the capital cities of the three African nations and were now looking to Spain for assistance. The Spanish reluctantly agreed, deploying multiple squadrons of its air force to the front in Egypt. Believing that the Spanish were going to invade, the Moroccan army would launch an assault into the Iberian nation, wanting to strike first. The Spanish military, completely caught off guard, was slow to respond, with southern cities falling to the Moroccans. Now faced with a battle at the home front, the Commonwealth would gather forces to fight in the Spanish front, hoping to repel the Moroccan forces.